So, Steam Next Fest is one of those events where you open the page, see hundreds of demos, and, well, then you realize most of them are either not your thing, or they look good for about 30 seconds and then kind of fall apart once you actually play them. So, instead of trying everything, I spent time with a handful of games that caught my attention. Mostly stuff that leans towards the darker action side, Souls-like ideas, or, just some games that actually felt good to play. Some of these surprised me, some of them definitely need some more work, but all 5 of these stood out for one reason or another. So, if you're looking for demos worth your time before Next Fest ends, here are 5 that actually left an impression on me. The first one is Armatus, something like that. Well, either way, the easiest way I can describe this game is imagine Doom Guy, but he lost some weight, picked up a giant scythe, and somehow became kind of part Power Ranger. That's kind of the energy here. This is a third-person roguelite shooter set in a ruined version of Paris that's completely overrun by demons. So you play as the last warrior of this supernatural order, and the whole goal is to fight your way through the city, looking for something called the Sunless Gate. But what stood out for me immediately was the feel. The gameplay is actually very precise. Your attacks have weight, your shots feel very responsive, and there's good feedback when you hit enemies. And for a demo, the enemy variety is surprisingly solid. You're not just fighting the same thing over and over, there are different demon types that force you to move, aim, and reposition. You start with a few different weapons, mostly guns, and you also have celestial abilities that you can mix into your runs. Since it's a roguelite, the idea is to experiment, die, come back, and build better combinations over time. Now, level design is definitely on the corridor side, let's say. But honestly, most roguelites are like that, and here it actually keeps the pacing tight, with some environments gradually growing in size as you keep moving along. Atmosphere is another strong point. The ruined Paris setting works, the tone is dark but not overly grim, and also there are demon-fighting nuns, which I wasn't expecting, but I'm not complaining. By the end of the demo, you fight a major boss called the Monument, and it actually feels like a proper test instead of just a damage sponge. So, if the full game expands the build variety and keeps adding enemy types, this could end up being one of those roguelites that people stick with. Next up is Vapor World, and this one is probably the closest thing here to a 2D Soul-style experience. The easiest comparison I can make is something like a mix between a Metroidvania and a Lies of P style tone. Very dark, very atmospheric, and very focused on parrying. And as you can tell, Lies of P is a big influence in the art style. I'm always a huge fan of games that actually commit to the whole deflection-based combat. That's the core mechanic here. You're not just dodging everything, you're meant to time your deflections and control fights that way. And when it works, it feels really good. The game takes place inside this surreal dream world. Basically, you're moving through a shattered mind, recovering memories, and uncovering what actually happens. The whole thing has this painted, almost storybook nightmare look to it, and it's visually one of the most interesting demos I played. There were also some stealth elements scattered here and there. You can crouch, you can avoid fights, you could even set up some ambushes. Not every encounter has to be head-on, which adds some variety to the pacing. The one issue right now is movements. It still needs some tweaking. I mean, it's not bad, but not as smooth as the combat deserves yet. If they tighten that up though, this could be a really strong Soulsvania type of game, especially for players who like parry-focused systems. Now, this next one is probably the weirdest game on the list, and I think I mean that in a good way. No Vacation for an Executioner is basically a retro PS2 style horror action RPG, and the developer is very clear about what they're going for. This is intentionally old school. The controls feel like classic PS2 era games. Think something like older Resident Evil or Silent Hill. There's a bit of stiffness, a bit of jank here and there, but it's deliberate. At least I think it is. It's trying to recreate that era, and honestly, once you adjust to it, there's something really cool about the whole experience. First, the art style is absolutely incredible. Most of the world is black and white with brown tones, and then the blood is this extremely bright red. It creates a sort of really striking contrast between all these different colors. Enemy designs are what I would call really unique. Everything feels really uncomfortable and surreal, like you're moving through a nightmare painting. The game follows a 17th century executioner who runs from his job and ends up triggering a full monster uprising. Now he has to survive and figure out what's actually happening in this world. What makes this even more impressive is that it's a solo developed game. Is it polished? Well, no. It's weird, it's rough in places, and the controls won't be for everyone. But if you like strange indie projects with strong identity, this is one of the most memorable demos in the Next Fest. Then there's Shattered Realm Earth, which is probably the most mechanically ambitious game here. The setting is interesting right away. It mixes cyberpunk elements with historical Chinese aesthetics, which gives it a look you don't see very often. This is a dual-world roguelite where you're constantly shifting between a surface world and an inner world, each with different risks and rewards. Combat has a lot going on. You've got multiple weapon types, each with unique mechanics and ultimate abilities, and then layer that with randomized blessings and upgrades to create different builds every run. There also seem to be multiple progression systems, talent trees, items, crystal systems, a lot of stuff is going on. So if you like a lot of customization, you really like to experiment with this game. The only issue I notice right now is that the combat still feels a bit on the janky side, along with a camera that's kind of wobbly and crazy. However, you can tell there's a lot of depth here, but it's not always smooth enough yet to fully enjoy it. This feels like one of those games that could be really good if the developers polished the responsiveness and tightened the animations. The foundation is definitely strong, it just needs some refinement. The last one is Far Far West, and this was probably the biggest surprise for me, because normally this isn't the kind of game I go for. It's a co-op PvE shooter where you play as a robot cowboy in a weird supernatural Wild West, and the tone is much lighter than the other games on this list. The art style is simple and a bit cartoony, but it actually kind of works. There's a lot of charm to it, and the whole thing doesn't take itself too seriously. Gameplay-wise, it's all about building your character through perks, upgrades, and abilities. So there are guns, spells, different playstyles depending on how you want to approach combat. You take on contracts, fight through areas filled with monsters and weird supernatural events, and then you extract with your rewards. The big focus is on co-op. You can play with up to 3 other players, but even solo, it's surprisingly fun. It's quirky, a little chaotic, and just one of those games that's more enjoyable than you expect going in. So, those are 5 demos from Steam Next Fest that actually stood out to me. As you can tell, some of these need some more polish, some of them already feel pretty solid, but all of them at least had something interesting going on, which is honestly the hardest thing to find during an event like this. If you're into darker action games, Soul-style mechanics, or just some smaller projects with strong ideas, these are definitely worth checking out before the event ends. And if you've been playing Next Fest demos yourself, let me know what you found, because there are literally hundreds of these things, and I'm sure there are some hidden gems in there as well. As always, thanks for watching, and make sure you like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff, and once again, have a great one.
To stand against the darkness